Hey everyone, it's Michelle here with Dorothy, and we're so happy to be joining you today. We don't have our fabulous host, Elizabeth. She's had some issues, had a car accident, so we are praying for her and filling in while she recovers and stays away from the computer per doctor's orders. So, but Dorothy, you said you wanted to talk a little bit about why you're dressed so fabulously.
Yeah, some may look at it and think, what is she doing? But once a year here in Southern Arizona, we have what we call Art in the Park. And we have these vendors who come from all over the country and set up, their vending for 3 days. Well, today was the only day that I had a chance to run down there, and it's just a fabulous event. And we live on what I call sort of a mini ranch. We have horses and chickens and cows. And, yeah. So, I when I go out in public, I try to at least look a little bit the part.
Right.
I just got in from Art in the Park, and, we're getting to the point in our lives where we're beginning to clear out instead of bring in more stuff.
Right.
And as a military family, through the years, we've done that. Every time you move, you tend to get rid of some things and then you bring in more.
Well, I think it's hard once you, so we've been here at Seymour Johnson for 3 years now. And we stayed at, our longest time anywhere was at in Tyndall in Panama City, Florida for 9 years. And I felt like after 9 years, we really had done a terrible job of purging because we waited a PCS and then we did it then. So I can imagine it's a little harder once you retire and then you stay somewhere to remember to kind of do some of that PCS cleaning.
Yeah, you generally don't do it, just like you said. Only this time, we had never lived anywhere more than 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Until we came here. And then we moved here and just sort of, we were supposed to be here too. And then we were to go back to Washington, D.C. And we liked it so much. We liked the community. We liked the climate. People think of, when you say Arizona, they think of Phoenix and the desert floor and the heat. But we're down in Southern Arizona and our elevation is like Denver.
Okay.
So we have this wonderful dry climate and yet a much cooler temperature than Phoenix does.
Right.
So we have enjoyed it and we've stayed, and we looked at each other recently and it was like, where have 19 years gone?
Right.
So we have 19 years of stuff that have accumulated since we did our last quote unquote PCS.
Wow.
And then retired out here. So we just recently put new wooden floors in all our bedrooms and all, which forced us to get things out of the closet and really start going through things again. And it's been like purging from hell. I kid you not.
Right. I bet.
I was like, why did I agree to do this? But nonetheless, that's part of resiliency, right? And that's
absolutely. Well, and that is our topic for today. So Dorothy and I felt like both of what we do in our stories kind of fit in with a resiliency topic. And in particular, we were talking about, like being a new military spouse. So full disclosure, I was prior active duty. And so I didn't get the full on experience of coming in and being a brand new military spouse. But I deal with it a lot in my current job, and I talk a lot. A big part of my job is resiliency and also talking to new military spouses. So I felt like I had quite a bit to add to the conversation. But I wanted to start, Dorothy, I don't know about you, but when we talk resiliency to people, because it's such a buzzword right now, what I always ask people is, what does resiliency mean for you? Not the real definition, but just when you hear it, what does that mean for you and how do you define it?
Yeah. For me, resiliency was one of my hardest learning curves because I grew up with very deep roots and lifelong friends and very close family ties, close to my community where I grew up. And so when we married, I almost didn't marry him because he was I'm going to be an Army Ranger. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I mean, he knew his purpose in life. And I thought, that is not the way I want to live. I don't want to uproot. I want to be a wife and mother, and I don't want to uproot my kids every 2 or 3 years, and God knows where we can go, which, we served in the Middle East, we served in Africa, we've had some really amazing deployments, and he's had multiple TDYs during the years, and so resiliency for me was really making this major shift from comfort zone, lifelong caring people around you, supporting you, to every 2 or 3 years, picking up, starting over, trying to figure out how can I fit in here, and then just about the time I would feel like I fit in, or I could make a difference, or I could contribute, we were gone again. And so
absolutely.
pain of that for me with my background was just excruciating, Michelle.
I bet.
So resiliency for me, it was living this out over and over and over again. And so for a military family in particular, to include our children,
absolutely,
resiliency and flexibility they're a must.
Mm-hmm.
We have to learn how to be light on our feet, mm-hmm. how to make a difference while we're there, however long that may be, wherever that may be.
Right.
And then be ready to start all over again whenever and wherever the military needs us. So
I love that you said, you talked about flexibility. And I think that, sometimes when I ask people what their definition is, some people talk about, the ability to bounce back, from stressors and, just demands of life and everything that we go through. And I think that's a big piece of it, is learning. I don't think we all start out, probably as resilient as we want to be. And especially as we learn through military life, we definitely become more resilient and learn those skills and those things that we need. But it definitely is, like you said, flexibility of being able to see where you're at and adjust and go, okay, like you said, now it's a new season where we are, and what do we do now? So
yeah. And another thing I learned along the way too on being resilient is you have a tendency to think, well, this is temporary, and so you live life initially on a temporary basis, or at least I did, because I knew we weren't staying, and so it was just a temporary life. Mm-hmm. But I realized early on that this is our life,
right?
And this is our family life, and what's more important than your family life? And so I realized that we needed to make a home, and it needed to be a real home. It wasn't temporary for however long that was,
right?
And so I became very focused on building a really loving, safe environment, even though it was temporary. And it was so cute when I started doing my writing here in my later years, and trying to give back to the community and share what I learned along the way. Initially, my husband was like, "What are you saying? He really wanted to internalize." He said, are you saying you were miserable for 45 years? And I didn't.
Was it all terrible?
yeah. And our boys were the same way. They're young adults now. But they looked at me and they said, well, Mom, we thought we had a great home.
Yeah.
Well, they did, because I intentionally created that environment. Even though it was, quote unquote, temporary, we made it feel like it was forever. It was our forever home. Wherever we. And I think that's really important.
I think that's tough as new military spouses. So a lot of the ones that I see when so here we have our, First Term Airman Center, and we actually, through my job, I developed a program where, the service member goes through a week-long First Term Airman course, but we didn't really have anything for the spouses, so we developed a little spouses social. And, now my husband just hit 19 years, so sometimes it's a little hard to remember, man, how was it, just even as an airman coming in and being that young and away from family. And for a lot of them, it's their first time away from family. Like you said, some may have had kind of the same support and upbringing that you had, others not as much, but still, in a new location, trying to adjust to, well, how do I fit in? The service member automatically gets to go to a new job and gets to have these immediate connections almost, they all have the same job, they're connected to the mission. And for spouses often, especially if they don't get a job right away, they're not, and they're at home, like you said, trying to figure out how do I fit, how do I make those connections. And I think it can be easy to say, well, I don't know how long we're going to be here, and so let's stay away from trying to make some of those meaningful connections, maybe not intentionally, but not really pouring everything in because of fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only just fear of the unknown and of meeting new people that, you don't know if you're going to fit in or not.
Right.
But also just the fear of, we naturally fear change. People naturally fear change. And just finding a job. I think it's wonderful now that there's even legislation around helping military spouses find work.
Absolutely.
And recognizing that that's been a huge challenge for military families around the globe for decades.
Absolutely.
So, now they've got legislation coming in behind this that is really encouraging. I celebrate that and think it's fabulous. And I think it's fabulous that you're working with these young spouses, and especially having had active. How long were you active duty?
I was a little over 7 years.
Wow.
Yep.
So that's wonderful that you have both perspectives.
It is. It's nice because it even, I didn't quite appreciate what spouses went through, I don't think, being active duty, because when we PCS'd, we both kind of, he went to his job, I went to mine, and automatically kind of found people. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's when I talk to new spouses, that's one of the biggest things we talk about is getting involved, whatever that looks like for you, whatever that means. And for some people, maybe if you're extroverted, it's a little easier to just kind of put yourself out there and go to that spouses club meeting, or, join something, but if you're more of an introvert, it can be challenging. And we find a lot of spouses kind of get caught in the, they live in base housing, but they're still so disconnected and they feel alone and lonely. And despite living so close to so many others, because it can be difficult to kind of put yourself out there, as you said, and take that leap and maybe even try something new. What kind of was for you every time, because you said you moved around a lot, what were some of the ways that you tried to, kind of bridge that gap, get involved and try to find your piece and your part?
Yeah, we only lived on post at Fort Benning. The rest of the time we lived out in the community. So being people of faith, we would get involved with the local church and find community that way. Usually I would find other mothers and wives with young children and who had kids around our age, so they'd have playmates and build relationships that way. So that was another. And I didn't work every place we've lived, but I like to work. I like to feel like I'm, I wish I'd known back then, and this is one of the things I work on now with families, is I wish I'd known back then. I wish I'd had someone encourage me to think in terms of becoming an entrepreneur and building a business around something that I loved, that made my heart sing, and that I could do anywhere. It didn't matter where the military sent us. Instead, I was more programmed, and I don't think I'm alone in this, but to look for a job.
Right.
And so, I was an educator, so teaching was a great option for me. However, we were talking about it's kind of hard to put yourself out there. A lot of times people in communities we found, and it depended sort of where you were, but they were reluctant to let you into their inner circle as well because they knew you were leaving. And it's painful. It's painful for everyone concerned, when you were up and gone. So so that was another piece of it, but I generally worked. I either taught school or I would tutor if we were abroad. I would tutor English to students, local kids
Right.
So, I built relationships that way. But today, if I were doing it again, and I would do it again, that's what I told my husband when he was like, well, what do you say?
Right.
You're killing me, I said, I'm not saying that I wouldn't do it again.
Right.
I'm not saying, I said, the growth that I have had as a result of serving as a military wife has been phenomenal, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But what I'm telling you is that it wasn't easy.
Right.
And just like you said, Michelle, and I figured out in my old age here, looking back, as I wrote a book, Loving Your Life, 7 Steps for Military Wives.
Oh, wow.
And as I wrote the book, I asked myself, what do I wish someone would have come along and shared with me as a young, green, military spouse who had no military experience whatsoever.
Right.
Except for this new husband who knew all along that's what he wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
But as I began to look back and really analyze, okay, what made it so hard for me? And I thought it was rather interesting that those closest to me, being my husband and our 2 sons, never really understood or knew how difficult it was for me.
Oh, wow.
Because I built this wonderful home and environment for them.
Right.
And yet I felt very alone and disconnected. And I felt uncertain. And, women, we have sort of a built-in radar for wanting to feel secure.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't feel secure because I never knew what was coming next.
Right. Always on edge, wondering when the other, when it's going to drop.
Absolutely. And then the last piece of it was, and I told Frank, I said, we would get to a new place, just like you touched on, and you would already have your job. You often knew people, but you stepped into the mission. You were mission focused. You had to be. You needed to be. Mm-hmm. And it's not that we were in your heart second to the mission, but we were second to the mission.
Yep, absolutely.
And it has to be that way. I'm not being critical of the way the military operates. They do what they have to do, and you have to be mission focused.
Right.
So what I'm saying to you is that in that process, we would get to this new place, and off you went, and you were totally there.
Right.
And you were connected, and you were mission focused, and it was great. But for me, I found myself at times feeling like I was coming up for the 3rd time, and I couldn't get air.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't sit around and cry in my beer and say, oh, woe is me, and stay hidden out. I mean, I knew some military wives who mostly stayed hidden out, and didn't even try. I mean, they would get really depressed.
Right.
But I said, I would get a job, and I would, I was okay.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it was easy, it wasn't easy, and you never knew how hard it was.
Well, I think that's interesting that you said that, they probably didn't, they didn't really know what you were struggling with. And I think, I know I'm guilty of it as well, of just, hey, these things need to get done, and just, I focus and it gets done. And, often, that self-care piece, or the, hey, maybe we need to share this burden a little bit and let them know, hey, this is how you can support me. I think we do, I know I at least do a terrible job of self-care, even though I preach it a lot and I talk a lot about how you have to do it, whatever that looks like for you. But I think it's forgotten about because we're so used to, like they have to put mission first. We're like, okay, well, I've got to keep everything going on the home front. I've got to get into that. Yeah. And even like with, so my husband is maintenance. He's a fighter crew chief by trade. And so often I couldn't rely on him. Even when he was here, I couldn't rely on him because at the, especially in his younger rank years, 1 week he'd be on one shift, the next week it's night shift, the week after that it's mid shift. And so I often acted like a single parent and just did everything because I would just did, like you said, that fear of like, well, he's not here next week. They decided to change the shift, or now he's deployed. Like, I've got to be able to handle all this. And I really didn't need to handle all of it because he was here. I think I put a lot of stuff on myself that I really didn't need to, and that I could have shared some of that burden with him, instead of trying to, there are times when you've got to do it all, and there's times when, we've got to share a little bit.
Appreciate it. Yeah. And I learned that lesson way too late.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important lesson for young military wives to, we have this, our service members are tough, they're
Right.
tough. They have to be, they have missions to accomplish. And so we seem to take on that and feel like that we have to be the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And, you don't like to admit that I do need help, or here's how I'm feeling, or, you don't want to appear weak.
Right.
An atmosphere that requires courage, it requires strength, it requires focus,
Mm-hmm.
and it requires us to become a lot more than we think we're even capable of being.
Right.
And there are no limits to what we can become. There are no limits. We put the limits on ourselves. They're here,
right.
and in our heart, and we don't have to go there, but I certainly did. I was, Superwoman.
Yeah.
And Superwoman doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
Not all
it works for a time, and then at some point you kind of trip over your cape and fall flat on your face, and you go, ooh.
Yeah, right. That's
trying to do too much.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I made it through, like with flying colors. Like I said, even my family members who were so close to me didn't see it.
Yeah.
Yet, as I looked back and I began to write the book, and I began to think, how can I give back to the military community with what I've learned? And I really began to analyze, why was it so hard for me, and yet I didn't show it?
Right.
And I figured out those three. This is my next book, by the way. It's going to be titled Warrior Wives.
Okay.
And it was those three different points of feeling disconnected,
Mm-hmm.
of feeling uncertain and insecure, and in the end, feeling insignificant.
Yep.
I just had this feeling of insignificance.
Wow.
And it is huge. It's absolutely huge. And, I can look back and like my boys say, well, God, Mom, look at all the things you did. And, you did this, you did that. And I said, I know I did.
Mm-hmm.
But in that process, because of those factors, I still felt insignificant.
Wow.
So I would encourage young military wives to, especially with the technology we have today,
Mm-hmm.
Create something you love that can add value to other people's lives and make a difference for them, and build a business around it and use technology. It doesn't matter where the military puts you.
Right.
And just embrace it, embrace the opportunities that's there. Had I stayed in my little hometown, I would have never done a lot of these really cool things that I did.
Right.
Even though they were hard.
It forces you to really grow. And like you said, where you probably started out, where you are now, you probably couldn't have pictured that, those years ago and thought, oh, this is how I'm going to grow and how I'm going to, but now, because of those experiences, you wrote a book, you're writing another one, you've had this life and these experiences. And I think that's even like, so when I talk to new spouses, they probably look at me a little crazy when I, even with their service members, I talk about, well, at some point you're going to leave the military. It seems so weird to talk about it now because you're so young in your career, but at some point you're going to leave. So you've got to think about that, and a lot of them look like, I've been in all of 6 months, what are you talking about? I had a long time to go. And I'm like, I know, but maybe it's just 4 years, maybe it's 6, maybe it's 20 or more. But I think it's important to, talk with both members need to be, on board and figure out, is this what we want to do long term? And especially for the spouse, like you said, find that job, right? So it can be difficult. Like you said, if you find that position, you fall in love. And then of course, as soon as you get where you want to be, now you've got to move, so finding a job that's portable, whether it's, like you said, creating your own business, finding what you're passionate about, or finding the thing that you're going to be able to move from place to place, because it can be, there's a lot of people I know who some of the jobs that they had just are not available, you know, and that's part of that piece. Especially, we were in Aviano for 3 years, and their spouses can't work on the economy. All you could do is work on base. And
Wow.
so because of the SOFA agreement, and so a lot of spouses struggled there because they were used to, their identity was tied to their job, you know, and when they got there and they couldn't have a job, it was like, well, now who am I? What do I do? What do you mean I can't work in Italy? I can't work, you know, having a hard time finding a job on the base. And so
Yeah.
I think that's a big piece of, you know, trying to find yourself and figure out what, you know, and not forgetting to find that piece for yourself. So
Yeah.
for me,
Yeah.
a lot of it was, you know, I wanted to make sure I got all my school done because I wanted to, you know, get to where I'm at now. And that took a lot of sacrifice and, you know, trying to make sure, hey, you know, this is my goal. This is my priority. This is where I want to be. And making sure that everything I did kind of led to that point, not always at the pace that I wanted it to, because of all of our you know, military hiccups along the way, a little bit slower in my education, but hey, you know.
But you stayed focused and you stayed consistent. You know,
Right.
that's part of it too. Is consistency is a big part of becoming resilient and really adaptable and flexible. I learned something really exciting lately on resiliency. I want to share with you. This is probably something you can use as you work with these young families too. You know, when I was a kid, all they talked about was IQ. You know, you would get tested at school and they would put you in a category, you know, and if you had a higher IQ, then they'd group you, you know, in reading groups, and all that stuff was done on IQ.
Right.
And it was a big deal, you know, just how intelligent are you? And how much information can we put in you that you retain, basically. That's what it was. And then a few years ago, you know, Goldberg, I think it's Goldberg, wrote a book on emotional intelligence. And he was a Harvard professor, and great book. And it was all about, you know, being really strong in emotional intelligence, and that you actually could excel and succeed better with EQ than IQ. It was even more important than our intelligence quotient. And as I read the book, I thought, oh my God, I love this, because I'd always felt like I wasn't smart enough. You know how hard we are on ourselves? I always felt not smart enough. And so when I started reading about emotional intelligence, I thought, that's me. That's what it is. Because, you know, I'm good with people. I like meeting people. I love people. And so I thought, you know, this is like building teams and building rapport. I was good at that. So all of a sudden it gave me a new feeling of worth, you know.
Right.
Look at EQ. But just recently I learned about AQ. And AQ, and I'd never heard of it before, was adaptability quotient.
Okay.
And I saw a presentation on AQ. And so this is something you probably want to share with your folks.
Yeah.
That the adaptability quotient is really how well we can adapt to change. And in today's world, the global environment, change has always been a constant. You can't get away from it. But I mean, it's accelerated now. I mean, it's accelerated change. It's like, whoa, what's next? You know, with all the technology and stuff. So it's how well can we adapt to change? That's our AQ. And so in the presentation, they were talking about that it is a measurable means of intelligence. And so how do we assess it? So like if you go in for a job interview, you know, they'll ask you to tell about what are your previous jobs and a problem perhaps that you solved, and, you know, but you're talking about something from the past. But with AQ, you ask people what if questions to where they have to start thinking in terms of future reference. This would be especially important for like military families.
Yeah.
Because we're constantly having to regroup, you know?
Right.
So it's about what if, how can you simulate, give me a situation that simulates what if this happened, what if that happened, what if. So that's a great first measure, is can people come up with what if, can they answer some what if questions?
Okay.
That's one. The second